Hello, my name is Mithat Sadanov, and this is going to be the first of a series of videos I'm doing on European history. The goal here with these videos is going to be to touch upon aspects that Cambridge glosses over for the most part, while also remaining brief so that these videos are easy for you to study. And this first video is going to be a part of what I'm calling Unit 1, where we'll look into specific countries and their socio-political conditions that are eventually going to lead into the start of conflict in the summer of 1914, and how they did so. Before you watch any of these, you should already have a basic understanding of the causes of World War I, because, like I said, we're going to touch upon things that might only get a paragraph in the textbook. And this first episode is going to be on Belgium. So, as hinted at previously, Cambridge's consideration of some of the nations that got involved on the war are surface level at best, and Belgium is a pretty prime example of that. In fact, from the really small amount of information you might read in the textbook, you might come to the same conclusion that the German army did, and say that Belgium was nothing more than a speed bump on the way to Paris. But that's really a shame, because Belgium could be considered a main cause for the war, turning from a smaller scale Franco-German war into a much larger Great War, and we're going to examine why. This video essay delves deeper into Belgium during the years preceding the war, while also focusing on what's actually important for our topic, mainly the causes of World War I, and I'll show at the end how you can apply this in your writing and your papers, particularly if a question on British foreign policy arises. Let's start from the beginning. Belgium becomes a sovereign nation in 1839. This happened after they and Luxembourg broke away from the Netherlands in the early 1830s after 8 years of struggle for independence. And you can see right here, there's a picture of the Benelux countries. We have the Netherlands up on the top, Belgium is in the bottom left, and Luxembourg in the bottom right. We're going to focus on Belgium. So, the recognition for their state, Belgium's state, came by means of the Treaty of London. The treaty set out that Belgium was to remain completely neutral. They could not make alliances with other great powers, and their options to pick favorites in politics and trade were limited. What's important to note here is that the treaty clearly did not mean Britain and Belgium were allied, which may be confusing given the fact that it's often said Britain's alliance with Belgium drew them into the war. What the treaty actually says, though, is that Belgium's independence had to be guaranteed by the signatories of the treaty. Should a foreign power invade Belgium, the signing nations would intervene. So, really at the start of World War I, everyone was supposed to honor their agreement with Belgium and come to its aid. And the signatories of this treaty were Austria, France, Russia, Britain, the Netherlands, and Prussia. Two of these would, of course, declare war on Belgium down the line. And before you go thinking that Germany was exempt from this treaty by 1914 because it wasn't Prussia anymore, you have to keep in mind that Prussia still existed within Germany and was the major state within it. The Kaiser of Germany still remained King of Prussia, so keep these factors in mind. Now we're going to fast forward 50 years to 1884, the Conference of Berlin. Africa was about to get carved up by the major European powers, but there was one region that attracted a lot of dispute, the Congo. Everyone wanted it for its large labor force and rubber and timber, but no one could agree on who should take it. Finally, the King of Belgium, Leopold II, stepped in and said that if he was given access to the state and could administer it himself, not through the Belgian government, but by himself as the personal owner of the entire Congo, he would open free trade across it. The resources his workers would extract inside the jungles there would be placed on the world market at reasonable prices so that Europe and the US could use these to fuel their industrial machines. So all the rubber, all the metal, all the timber, anything that was harvested in the Congo would be placed on the world market. It wouldn't just exclusively go to Leopold or to Belgium. France, Britain, and Germany agreed to this, especially because Belgium didn't own it themselves, and even if they eventually would own it, their status as a neutral power meant that they could not constitutionally pick sides nor trading partners. However, things weren't going to turn out very well for Leopold through this deal. And that's mostly because Leopold himself was going to do a lot to ruin the region. Countless atrocities were committed against the Congolese, including the mutilation of hands of workers that didn't fulfill quotas on time, mostly by cutting off said hands with machetes. But when word of these atrocities reached the European and American public eventually, demands were made for Leopold to have his private state taken away. The Belgian government decided in 1908 that the best way to allay this outcry, while also getting to take the Congo for itself, would be to annex the region from Leopold. The king objected, of course, but it didn't matter much given the fact that he was dead just a year later. However, after incorporating the region into their new colonial empire, the Belgians shut down the free trade that the three major powers had enjoyed so much. and the reason that they gave was that they needed to repair and reform the region after Leopold's terrible reign. But France and especially Britain didn't like this, and relations with Belgium soured. Britain held on to this animosity, with some in the government beginning to suspect that Belgium would not reopen free trade across the Congo, and by 1911, opportunists within the British government saw a chance to forcibly purchase a region of the basin, or even invade Belgium to gain this portion. And what was this portion? Well, let's go to this new map of Africa that I pulled. Here the Congo is that dark red. It's Belgium's colony right there, and Britain is going to be that bright pink. You can see that all of Britain's colonies almost form a line right through the middle of Africa, with Congo or Germany in the way. So, Britain wanted control over the eastern portion of this colony, not only because of the riches of the Congo itself, but also because it would connect those two sides. It would finally allow the British to realize their dream of a Cape to Cairo railway. Cape referring to Cape Town over in South Africa, at the bottom of the African continent, and Cairo referring to the major Egyptian city up in the very north of Africa. And this proposed rail line would connect all of the major British colonies together, and that would allow instant, really quick communication across the continent. It would allow for resources to be moved from the center out to the coastlines. Overall, just a great thing for the British. And for many imperialist politicians in Britain, and there were plenty of imperialist politicians, this was their passion project. And the current affair with Belgium displayed a massive opportunity for the more radical jingoists in the nation to achieve this. While these thoughts began flying about both Parliament and the British public, Britain chose not to recognize Belgium's annexation of the Congo region. Things began to escalate further when rumors circulated that Belgium was going to sever ties with France and Britain, and instead was going to establish greater diplomatic channels with Germany, which definitely were true. The Belgians were considering this mostly to put pressure on the British and the French. And there was even a crazier, more radical theory going around that the Belgians were thinking about opening access across the country to the Germans so that the Germans could move their armies should war between the Entente Cordiale and the Triple Alliance break out. For many obvious reasons, and some less obvious ones that we'll get to in a second, the Entente couldn't have that. And so by mid-1913, Britain gave in and recognized the annexation. Okay, we have all the history together, but what do we gain from this? I know that I said this video is about Belgium, and it is, but perhaps the greatest value from taking a deeper look into Belgian history is what we glean about Britain's attitudes during the antebellum period, leading up to World War I. Britain's decision to abandon its Cape to Cairo passion project in favor of keeping Belgium satisfied and therefore France safe is really significant because it shows that the British were willing to abandon their personal interests if it meant a chance would arise to contain Germany. Why would a non-hostile Belgium contribute to this, you may wonder? Well, the truth is that Britain was almost entirely sure a German attack was going to come through Belgium. If an attack occurred, it was going to be a lot easier for Britain to keep its people on its side in the event of war with Germany if the war was less about two great powers fighting each other, in this case France versus Germany, and more about the British defending a small nation that was wrongfully invaded. So it wasn't necessarily that the British needed Belgium to fight against Germany, they needed motivation for their people. So this rings doubly true because this theoretical war could also be spun as Britain upholding its agreements, in this case the Treaty of London, no matter how dated they may be, therefore making the war a moral one based on the idea of national honor for Britain. Not everyone in Britain was on board with this plan to give up a possible British Congo, of course, in the same way that not everyone was ready to go to war a year later. But this single event in 1913, Britain's recognition of Belgium's Congo, could be used to show that by that year the majority of the government was committed to the Entente Cordiale as a military alliance and not just a mutual understanding. As for the Treaty of London itself, an argument that is sometimes brought against Britain honoring this agreement is the idea that it was just a scrap of paper, a term that was coined by the German Chancellor presiding in 1914 at the outbreak of war, von Bethmann. And while in your papers you can use this argument, keep in mind that by doing so you'll be taking on a very German perspective. This scrap of paper was still incredibly important to the people most potentially affected by it, the Belgians. They relied on the fact that their country's independence was guaranteed by the other major powers. And talk of this treaty was being resurfaced inside British political circles as the British began looking for justifications in a future German war. By these standards, it was far more than a piece of paper. On the other side, though, An overabundance of British and French influence in Belgium by 1913 could also be used to show that Belgium was informally violating their neutrality by almost solely negotiating with the Entente, thereby proving that the Treaty of London was outdated and void. And these are my sources. You can check some of these. The rest of it was general knowledge, what I remembered from the Cambridge history books and from all the other sources that I researched. So I really hope that you can gain something from this and you understand just how important Belgium was, at least to the British. They needed it in order to be able to declare war on Germany in 1914. And it's really telling of their motivations and their priorities at the time. So I hope that you can use this in your writing. If you do, if there is one thing that you can take away from this, if you want to argue against the Treaty of London, understand that there's less evidence to really support that side. You still could take it, and there is enough to be able to take that side, but it's easier to argue that the Treaty of London was still a very verifiable legal document that mattered a lot to a lot of people. So keep that in mind, and good luck in your writing.